And I'm very happy to use the word doctor actually. And then, so today we continue this tradition as we invited another one of those, can I say, 3 pioneers who made INCEIF very proud. I know at least the governor is very proud for being conferred with a doctoral title. So that is our very own Dr. Tunku Alina Alias. So before she starts telling you her story of her thesis, writing a qualitative, her title today, writing a qualitative thesis for Waqf reforms in Malaysia, a journey. Let me just give you a brief background of her. I'm sure many of you have known her. Well, Tunku Alina had her master's in law from King's College London. Should I tell the year?
Telling my age.
No, we don't want to tell that. Okay. And then in 2008, that was when she joined INCEIF as the first batch of PhD candidates. Is that right? And then she had her historical viva on the 26th of September. Alright, so which eventually conferred her as a doctoral degree in our 3rd convocation recently. So now together, career-wise, together with her partner, Miss Wong Lu Ping, in 1992 they established their own boutique law firm called Wong Lu Ping and Tunku Alina. And then her own practice today is in investments and corporate advisory, specializing in Islamic contracts and banking documentation. She is also a certified mediator with the Malaysian Bar Mediation Centre and an associate mediator with the Singapore Mediation Centre. She has also published a few articles and presented a few recently. So let's not waste any moment. So ladies and gentlemen, please extend a warm applause to our Dr. Tunku Alina as we welcome her to the front.
Okay, Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm here to share my experience of my journey the past, say, 2.5 years. And I'm trying to keep this short, but I have a lot of materials to share with you. So let's see how we go. If you get fed up of me and tell me to move on, then please say so. If you already know it, tell me so. I may be saying something trite. It's just that I wanted to cover as much area as possible because I'm not sure at which stages each of you are. So I will start from the beginning, but if most of you feel, tell me so. Okay? So today we're sharing. My name is Alina, and I began studies in January 2008 as one of the first batch of PhD students. I initially registered as a part-time student, so I was supposed to do it by coursework and dissertation, but subsequently I applied to convert to full research. This was allowed at that time for January and June 2008 students. I don't know what the policy is today. Okay. In any event, by the time I applied, I finished 10 subjects, including all my core subjects, and I had sat for my qualifying exams. At that time, it was called qualifying exams, and I had passed that. So, in any event, the university allowed me to convert, and I proceeded as a PhD by full research. So, the agenda for this next hour is quite straightforward. I think it's an hour, but it should be less. I will share with you the process that I went through and touch on my thesis at the end. In any event, I'm speaking from experience of the past 2.5 years, so please don't take my presentation today as a definitive guide or even as a precedent. Please make sure at all times to check with the GSD on any recent amendments on their policies and their guidelines. Okay? So from my perspective, there were 4 distinct parts of the process. There was a beginning, okay, simply put, there was a beginning part, and then there was a research and writing part, and then came the viva, and then finally the revision and submission of the bound thesis. In terms of time, the research and writing took the most. But I would say that all parts were equally important. So before doing anything, please make sure you get a copy of the INCEIF Thesis and Dissertation Guidelines 28 of 2010. Okay, as you realize, this was produced after I began my work. Okay, I began in 2009, this came out in 2010, and I really wish I had it when I started, because this guideline tells you the difference between a dissertation and a thesis. You must remember I converted to research. I was expected to produce a thesis, whereas some of my colleagues were doing a dissertation. So you have to be aware of these differences. It gives you a very good framework. So make sure, get this one, read it thoroughly. And the next thing you've got to come up with is your big idea. Alright? I'll talk a little bit more about the big idea in a few seconds. But at this stage, before you start, that's all it is. It's just a big idea. So what you're really doing is coming up with a working title for your work. And in my case, my big idea at that time was unleashing the economic potential of the Waqf, a modern perspective on Waqf model. Why I call it version 1 is because that is not what I ended up with. Alright? Okay. I had some fuzzy idea and some sense that we needed to do something about the Waqf, but I wasn't sure what yet at that time, so it really was a very general title. Remember that you will be writing your thesis or dissertation for your academic committee. Okay? This will be initially your main supervisor and the co-supervisor. And eventually it will extend to your internal examiner, your external examiner, and your viva committee. Alright? So keep this in mind during your writing period. Don't imagine you're writing for the public or that you're going to be publishing for the banking and finance industry. Don't throw all that out. Alright? You're writing for your academic committee. Okay? So if you want to publish later, that will be later. But remember this at all times throughout your writing period. Choose your supervisors carefully. Make sure that they can support you during your work in terms of time and attention. Also ensure that there's a good fit in terms of personality, because you will be working with them for a good number of years. Consult the GST if any of your supervisors is going to be an external supervisor. In my case, my main supervisor was Prof. Murad Sukaksha, and the co-supervisor was Prof. Said Hamid Al-Junaid. Now, I chose both of them because they both had an economics background, and Prof. Murad is a specialist in Waqf. And my approach essentially was an economic approach. So, a good choice of supervisors. So, let's talk about the big idea. Okay, one of the most difficult things that you're going to do is coming up with this big idea. In the beginning, I had a lot of fantasy. I fantasized about coming up with a macroeconomic model that was going to win me the Nobel Peace Prize. And I was pretty stubborn about this. I actually started writing on this premise, thinking, imagining I was going to go out and get a Nobel Peace Prize. But eventually you find out that you will have to narrow your focus to something very specific. So what it is that your big idea must be a really big idea, okay? If you can't think of something big, maybe you can think of a new model which has great utility, or you can come up with some really fantastic raw data that's never been unearthed before. But we know that's not easy, so you can take my route. I wasn't getting anywhere with doing a big idea, or coming up with a model with a fantastic utility, or with some unearthing raw data that's never been unearthed before. So I took this route, which is I identified a gap in literature. So what you want to do is you do some basic reading, 20 to 30 articles, and then you identify the conversation that's going on in those articles. basically you have to identify the conversation in the scholarly writing and find out where there is a gap that you can contribute to. In other words, that's a conversation that you have to identify, and then you have to come up with something fresh in that strand of thought to contribute. And once you have done this, you must go through a very important exercise, and you must, I really recommend that this exercise you must go through. You have to ask yourself the so what question, okay? And you have to ask yourself so what 3 times at least. So in my case, okay, I want to show that the Waqf is not performing. So what? I want to prove that the Waqf today is not performing because in the past it played a big role in Islamic society. So what? Well, I want to prove that Waqf can contribute to the economy of an Islamic society. So what? I want to show that the Waqf is an economic institution and it can contribute to growth and development because it's proven this over a period of years, and it's proven its resiliency, and it will be a shame to let it fade away. So finally, my big idea or my claim was this. I'm not going to read it to you. That was my claim. And the answer to my last so what question are these. Okay, so whatever you do, whatever your big idea is, make sure your supervisors agree with the big idea. All right? Okay, now you have your big idea, you have your supervisors, we can begin the process. So the stage 1 is the beginning. I began with a research proposal. You'll find the requirements and format in that guideline that I was telling you about. And if you want to see mine, which was before these guidelines came out, just email me. My email address is at the end of the presentation. Your supervisors must sign off on this research proposal to indicate that they are willing to supervise you on that basis. So prepare 4 copies and extra 1 for yourself for records, and submit it to GSD. Now technically, once your supervisors have signed off, you're ready to go. Okay, you've got the green light more or less. The convention at INCEIF is that you will have to present your research proposal at colloquium. So once you get through the colloquium, I strongly suggest that you obtain some form of clearance, some form of confirmation that no changes will be required in your research proposal, both in terms of your big idea and in terms of your methodology, because you don't want to be stripped out at later stages. Okay, so this is my suggestion. Get this confirmation. And then immediately register the number of credit hours you need for the semester. Now do your calculations carefully, because you don't want to run out of credit hours. You haven't finished the thesis and then you have to pay for continuing fees. And that's 1,000 ringgit semester for nothing. So do your calculations. In my case, I registered, why are you smiling? I registered for 6 hours, 6 credit hours per semester. And that took me 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 semesters, I think. More or less. There were some semesters I was ambitious, so I registered for more. But be careful, gauge your own capabilities and accordingly register. Okay. on to the second stage, which is research and writing. Before you begin, I would highly recommend that you get all three items. The first one is the INCEIF Thesis and Dissertation GSC Guide 2008. The second one is this book that will tell you about the Chicago style of writing by Kate Redian. And the third one, if you can afford it or find a copy somewhere, get a referencing software. All the INCEIF guidelines, they do not insist on a particular style of referencing or writing, but Prof. Obai has asked me to use, or he asked me to use the Chicago style. So that's why this book is very important, so you have an idea of what it's like. I use EndNotes for my referencing software, and I purchased it from Columbia Soft at a student price. So if you show me and proof your ID, they will give you a student price for it. It's very useful to have this software because you can choose any format of referencing. You can use it for afterwards or any other articles that may require different referencing style. But what happens is that it will automatically generate it for you without you having to key it in manually. Okay, if you have 50 references, fine, you can do it manually. But I had 700 references, and towards the end it got a bit crazy. So I was so glad I had this software. And it enabled me to do my post-Viva revisions very quickly, and you'll see why I needed this at the end. Another important thing that this software allowed me to do was it allowed me to type in some keynotes or references, so that later if I need to search, it was very easy for me to search for my reference. So the first thing when you physically start writing, your word processing, is please build a template. Build your template document and refer to the INCEIF guide that I mentioned. Use this template for every piece of writing that you do, whether it's notes, whether it's a chapter, or anything else. Use that template. Read the guide for the template requirements and use styles in Word. Because if you look at Word, your Word software, there will be a style to fix your parameters for your title, your subtitle, your chapters, your paragraphs, your quotations, your tables, your footnotes. Fix it. Because if you're disciplined enough to do this from the beginning, it'll make your work so much easier, especially at later stages in the writing, because everything's already consistent. Now, please be mindful of length restrictions. There's a maximum of 60,000 words for dissertation, and at least 60,000 words for thesis. You will find that as the document gets longer, and if you're using EndNotes like me, the computer will slow down considerably and it will sometimes hang. I recommend that you write each chapter separately and date each version. And once you are ready to combine your chapters, unformat your video. Unformat your video, then open your first chapter in outline mode, and add your other chapters to it. Once you have a complete piece of work, then reformat your video and open up on a normal printer. Otherwise, you'll be waiting in front of your computer for a long time. Sometimes the computer hangs, you haven't saved your work. It is so stressful. Okay, so if you can, try to do this. I'd also like to talk to you about your writing voice. As I mentioned earlier, you are writing for your academic committee. So I think you will have to stick with certain academic conventions and not get too bold. So check with your supervisors. For starters, decide how you want to refer to yourself. Do you want to refer to yourself as I or we? In my case, I chose this writer. Not quite sure why I did that. I thought it was how we begin I and we. So anyway, I chose this writer and my supervisors did not object to this. You will find that Kate Redian also promotes the use of passive sentences rather than active sentences. Passive sentences is like the cat was fed by Alina. An active sentence is Alina fed the cats. But in academic writing, apparently they like the passive voice. Because the whole idea is that your dissertation and thesis is supposed to be part of a scholarly conversation on the subject matter, and you don't want to sound so bold or forward or too confident, because you're relying a lot on other scholars to substantiate your argument. So the convention is use the passive voice. However, if you're using words, you'll find that words, being Americans, they don't like passivity. So they ask you to convert your sentences into active. It's up to you. Okay, so maybe sometimes you might want to use an active voice, but it is your choice. Finally, although you're writing an academic work, please remember you still like your reader to be excited when he or she reads it and not fall asleep. So take a leaf out of the books of thriller writers and have a thorough line that carries through your writing and pulls the narrative from chapter 1 to the last. So imagine you're writing a fiction, although it's an academic work, and try to make it exciting. So let's talk about the structure of the work. So conceptually, let's talk about it conceptually first. Your work is a thesis or a big idea, and it will comprise of your claim or hypothesis, and you will have to provide the reasons for your claim and the evidence or data to support your reasons. And in the event your reasons are not obvious, you have to provide warrants, which is proof of relevancy. Okay. I began with a working hypothesis. The reason it was a working hypothesis was that it's bound to change. So don't be rigid, don't be attached to anything, because these are all work in progress, it will change. Okay. So in my case, I had 3 hypotheses in my big idea, and it was a historical hypothesis, an economic hypothesis, and then a hypothesis on going forward. So this is conceptual, but physically, there's a pretty fixed structure to academic work, like a thesis and dissertation. What I did was I went out and got a corkboard, a very sticky corkboard, and I got post-it notes, and I did a storyboard, because it made it easier for me to rearrange my chapters or my sections later. So if I didn't like this here, I move it there. It gives you a sort of like bird's eye view of what your work is going to look like later. And it also gives you flexibility. So that was the way I did it. You may have a different way, but it was very helpful for me. So physically, there are some pretty standard chapters you should have in your work. There's the introduction. It gives you a background for your work, your research objectives, your hypothesis, your research questions, your methodology, and what you hope that your research is going to produce. In the beginning, just start with a skeleton. Don't write a full-blown introduction, okay? Because seriously, your introduction will actually be written at the end, right? So just start off with a skeleton. Next is your literature review chapter. In my case, initially, what I've done is I embedded a literature review section in each of my hypotheses, because it made for better flow of reading. But my final version, you will find that I took out all these sections and I put it under one literature review chapter in the beginning. It wasn't the best in terms of readability. One of my professors was not happy when I did this, but I think eventually it worked out that this is more or less the accepted way things are done. So this is what I did. After the literature review chapter, it will be a research and data chapter, followed by an analysis chapter, and then you will come up with a proposal for going forward chapter. I think this last bit, is having a proposal or going forward, it's not necessarily compulsory in all work, but I believe INCEIF expects us to have a suggestion, something that would be useful for the industry. So think very much about this. You will also have a conclusion whereby you finish with ideas for further research. So when you are hunting for resources for your literature review, I recommend two very useful websites, which is WorldCat and ProQuest. Before I started actually writing, before I wrote, when I was still reading, I managed my materials by setting up a blog site. So I'm Waqf girl on Blogspot, and I entered my notes on that. But eventually, when I started writing, I incorporated the relevant materials directly into my writing. So you'll find that my Blogspot stopped at a certain point, and you know that I started writing. As you read, you are bound to change perspective. So just keep an eye on your big idea, and review your literature review against your big idea. Your LR will also give you ideas on what data to collect. So allow it to guide you accordingly. Don't be too rigid about things. Finally, most importantly, please consider other points of view. But just because you don't like a certain point of view doesn't mean you should exclude it. Because I learned this lesson during my Viva, because my external examiner said, you didn't consider this other point of view. And he was right, I did not, because I did not like it. You can't afford to do that, alright? So please consider other points of view, put it inside the literature review, deal with it in your analysis later. Tell your academic committee in your writing why you don't like it, and in your Viva as well, if needs be. Okay? If you want a good book on how to write a literature review chapter, there's an art to even writing this chapter. You realize that, no? Get this book. It's a very good book, and it'll tell you how to write an engaging literature review chapter. That's not going to put people to sleep. So sometimes there was a tendency for me to accumulate a pile of articles and books before I keep reading. This is normal. You're so lazy to key in, you just read, and put it to one side. So maybe what I was doing was I was mentally sifting yes, no, yes, no, yes, no. I suggest that's not a good way of doing things. Key in the references as you read it. Don't accumulate. The reason is that, as you go